Welcome to class in the time of social distancing. This video is to show you how to set up your first-person controller without using the FPS Controller asset from the Unity Asset Store. So what we have is two scripts. We have one for the player controller and then one that controls the camera that will be underneath it. I've created a small scene here that has just a plane that I turned red and then a bunch of cubes just so we have stuff to look at so we can tell them when we're actually moving around. So let's get started. To make the player controller, we're going to want to first create an empty game object. I'm going to name this player. On here, we're going to need to add a couple things. So we're going to need a capsule collider. We're also going to need a rigid body. And then we are going to drag and drop our player controller script onto the player. Underneath the player, with the player selected, you're going to create an empty child. And we're going to name this player camera. And on the player camera, we're going to need to add a camera component. And then we will drag and drop the camera look script onto the camera. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is that your capsule is going to dictate how tall you are. So one thing that I like to do is come in here to the capsule collider and change it to be a little bit taller, just to kind of make sure that we are of the height that we want. You notice that the camera is also down a little bit, so you can kind of drag the camera up so that it's at eye height if you want, whatever you want to do here. The one thing to keep in mind is that just make sure that the capsule is totally above the ground, because if it's kind of down like this, when you start the game, it will fall through the floor. The last thing I want to do here is on the player, on the rigid body, I want to freeze the rotation of the rigid body. So I'm going to freeze the X and the Z rotation so that our player can only rotate on the Y, which means it can like kind of spin around on its axis like this. So it can spin this way, but it won't go crazy and like flip and fall over. Okay, so let's take a look at the scripts that we have on the player. So I've set up something pretty simple. So I made a speed variable so you can affect how quickly that you're moving through the scene, a move forward and move side, and then a rotation value. So move forward and move side are basically doing the same thing. They are getting the vertical and horizontal axes. This means that this is the A and D, or the side arrows, or the that's the horizontal axis, and then the vertical axis is the W and S keys, or the arrow keys. And basically what input.getAxis means is that if none of those keys are pressed, the value of move forward is 0. If let's say the left arrow or A is pressed, it equals -1, and if D or the right arrow is pressed, it equals +1. So basically just based on whichever one you have pressed, it's -1, 0, or 1. And I've done basically the same thing but written out using if-else statements down here for the rotation value. So I decided that the Q and the E keys were pretty nice for rotation. And so if I hit Q, we rotate to the left, so it's -1. If I hit E, I rotate to the right at a +1. And if neither of them are pressed, rotation is 0, so we are not rotating. Now, all we've done so far is just assign the value to these variables. And here I am actually translating and rotating in my script. So I'm taking the transform node of our character and moving it according to the value of these two variables. And then I'm rotating it according to the value of the rotation. And basically what this does is every frame, it's going to move -1 or +1 times 10, so 10 at time.delta-time, which basically means this moves it at frames per second as opposed to units per second as opposed to units per frame. So time.delta-time is the amount of time that elapses in between frames. So if you look here, update is called once per frame. So if I move at a rate of 10, if I don't put this in, it'll move 10 every frame as opposed to 10 every second. And so bringing this in here lets us move according to like time as opposed to frames. So that's what that is. The camera look script is much more simple. It's taking the mouse input, the y-axis of the mouse, so like I'm moving my mouse in the y right now, and it's basically rotating the camera to where you have the mouse kind of looking at. So if I move my mouse up, the camera moves up, and if I move it down, the camera rotates down. So this is just allowing us to look up and down. And if you don't like how this works, you don't feel like you need to look up and down, you don't have anything in your scene that is like high up or low down, you could just not use this script. You don't need it, but I thought it was kind of nice. So let's take a look at what that looks like. If I hit play, here we go. So I can look up and down, I can move. These are just using the WASD, and then if I use Q and E, I can rotate. All right.